This lesson is about creating story context for numerical expressions and tape diagrams and solving word problems. Okay, a lot of these problems are going to be solved easier if you use a tape diagram, but that's not the only way to solve it. So at this point, you need to choose which way you think is most efficient for you and work through that. I'd like you to try these problems on your own, and I'll read them to you, and then I'll show you how to solve them after you try it. Mrs. Hayes has half a liter of juice. She distributes it equally to 6 students in her tutoring group. The first question is, how many liters does each of those students receive? Okay. How many more liters will she need if she wants to give each of the 24 students in her class the same amount of juice the next day? Think about what it's asking and how you can solve that. Solving the first part, I see that I'm trying to have half a liter that I'm dividing by 6 students, which tells me I need 1/2 divided by 6, which is the same as 1/2 times 1/6, which gives me 1/12 of a liter per student. Now, if I'm going to, or if she's going to give 24 students 1/12, I need to find out how much I have. And here's how I'll do that. For that, I take my 1/12 of a liter and I multiply it by 24 students. Here I cross-simplified so that I have 2. 12 goes into 24 twice, 12 goes into 12 once, so I have 2 liters. This is assuming that the 6 students in her tutoring group are not part of the 24 students in her class. If they're separate, remember to keep these separate. If, however, the 6 students are part of her 24 students, then really you're going to then subtract the half a liter that she already has, because you're adding 18 students instead of doing 6 students one day and then 24 the next day. So read the question carefully to make sure that you know what it's asking. Joseph has 3.5 hours left at work. He needs half an hour to complete 1 oil change. Part 1. How many oil changes can he complete the rest of that day? Part 2. He can complete 2 car inspections in the same amount of time as 1 oil change. How long is 1 car inspection? And Part 3. How many car inspections could he complete the rest of that day if he did not change any oil? Try this problem and then I'll show you it piece by piece. For the first part, we have 3.5 hours of the day left divided by half an hour. So we have changed it into a fraction form of 3.5 divided by 1/2. And then I did 2 different things. I changed 3.5 into an improper fraction and my division into multiplication, where I cross-simplified and I saw that there were 7 oil changes. Another way that you could do this is you know that there are 2 halves in 1 whole, in which case there are 6 halves in 3 wholes, and you're adding another half, which would be 7 halves if you wanted to do it mentally. Now let's see how long 1 car inspection takes. Here what we did is we have half an hour, and we're dividing that by 2 inspections. Okay, remember we're not dividing 2 inspections by half an hour. So then we have half divided by 2, and when we change that, we have half times half, which gives us a quarter, or 1/4 of an hour, which is 15 minutes for 1 oil change. Now we can use that to see how many car inspections he complete for the rest of that day. To solve this last part, you could look at it 2 ways. You could do 3.5 hours divided by 1/4 of an hour, which would give you 14 inspections. Or you could go back to your givens and look at the information and see that it takes twice as long to complete an oil change. So you have 7 oil changes, which will take twice as long, which will give you 14 car inspections. That's just another way to solve the problem. Try one more problem. Mrs. Lack buys $14.40 of grapefruit. Each grapefruit costs 80 cents. Part 1. How many grapefruit did she buy? And Part 2. At the same store, Mr. Vu spent 1/3 as much money on grapefruit as Mrs. Lack did. How many grapefruit did he buy? Okay. Solving this, I'm just taking $14.40 and dividing it by 80 cents. Remember, I need to move my decimal, and I was able to do it just once because I can do 8/10 instead of 80/100. So I moved it once here, I also moved it, and then moved it up right away. Then I had 144 divided by 8, which gives me 18, showing me that Mrs. Lack bought 18 grapefruit. If Mrs. Lack bought 18, I can find out how many Mr. Vu bought, if he only spent 1/3 of that amount. Instead of going back and finding 1/3 of $14.40, I can just find 1/3 of the total amount of grapefruit. So 1/3 of 18 grapefruit, I cross-simplified to find out that I have 6 grapefruit that Mr. Vu purchased.